Hi, welcome to another English language A-level video on an aspect of language and occupation. This is the third video actually that we've done in the series, and this one is going to be looking at jargon, at highly subject-specific technical language, the uses and abuses of jargon in the workplace. And let's start off with a recording of somebody using a lot of jargon. So how many pieces of jargon do you hear in the following clip?
And all monitored by Rockwell software is Rockwell Automation's Retro Encabulator. Now basically the only new principle involved is that instead of power being generated by the relative motion of conductors and fluxes, it's produced by the modial interaction of magnetoreluctance and capacitive diractance. The original machine had a base plate of prefabulated amulite surmounted by a malleable logarithmic casing in such a way that the two spurving bearings were in a direct line with a panometric fan. The lineup consisted simply of 6 hydrocoptic Marsal vanes, so fitted to the ambifacient lunar wane shaft that side fumbling was effectively prevented. The main winding was of the normal lotus-o deltoid type placed in panendermic semi-boloid slots of the stator, every 7th conductor being connected by a non-reversible trendy pipe to the differential girdle spring on the up end of the gram meters.
I hope that's all perfectly clear. So certainly you must have got into double figures there and the amount of jargon that you heard in that clip. Okay, so let's have a think about the benefits and problems in using this level of highly subject-specific language. The sorts of language that he was using there, or the kind of language that we've got here from a previous video, which is medical jargon. So what are some of the advantages, but also what are some of the issues in using this? I would pause the video there and scribble down some ideas. Well, in terms of the pluses of jargon, it's the language of fellow professionals. So it's enabling people who are specialists in certain semantic fields and who share schematic knowledge. It enables them to communicate information in very, very precise ways and very efficiently as well, using as few words as possible in order to say the most. So this highly technical language prevents misunderstanding. You know, the everyday kind of vague language that we use in conversation. Well, you know, this technical language doesn't do that. So it prevents misunderstanding and it stops ambiguities from arising. On the other hand, there are problems if it's used towards the wrong kind of audience. So jargon can sometimes be used to exclude, and sometimes deliberately so, to deliberately exclude the public, and maybe to try and give that false impression of high authority. So people can feel very much excluded from groups if they don't understand the language that's being talked about. Okay, so we're talking about the power of exclusive language. Exclusive language. An exclusive language enables people to be part of a discourse community, and I suppose it gives them a kind of overt prestige as well. It gives you a kind of status, doesn't it, where you understand the vocabulary, you use this particular discourse, and those people over there, they don't get the code. So Holmes and Stubbs came along and they discussed the concept of these communities of practice. So these are groups who regularly engage with each other in the service of some kind of joint enterprise. They share a repertoire. It enables them to communicate in a kind of verbal shorthand, and it's often difficult for outsiders to penetrate. So these could be the language of occupational groups, but it also could be to do with some kind of social groups like online gaming, for example. Bernard Spolsky says that a specialist jargon doesn't just serve to label new and needed concepts, but actually what it's doing is it's establishing bonds. It's establishing bonds between members of the in-group, and actually it's putting up fences, it's enforcing boundaries for outsiders. And so memorably, you've got this quotation where he says, well, if you cannot understand my jargon, you don't belong to my group. Let's have a look at some exclusive language that's in two occupational areas. We're going to have a look at mining discourse, and we'll spend a little bit of time looking at legalese as well. Now, the mining information is taken from the AQA textbook, by which I mean this one, on page 181. And here we've got 9 different mining jobs. I wonder if you can work out what these people do. So have a look at the morphology of each word and speculate, well, what role might each one entail? We've got banksman, checkweighman, detailer, hewer, putter, shaft sinker, shot firer, trapper, and winder. What might those jobs entail? On the next slide, I've put down 4 of them. So we've got banksman. So what does a banksman do? Well, they take out the wagons or loaded tubs from the cage and they push the empty ones in. You've got your checkweighman. This is quite interesting. The checkweighman was actually paid by the miners themselves. So not employed by the organisation, but the miners themselves to check the records of the man who weighed the coal. So that shows a level of distrust that's going on. You've got the detailer or dayman. So this is a day labourer. This is the person who's given work on a daily basis as required. You've also got a hewer, someone who cut the coal. You've got other ones that are described there on page 181 in the textbook. These are very distinctive, specific job titles, aren't they? Now, the thing is, language within one occupational group, like mining, is often variant depending on the area. So, and to demonstrate this, a person who hauled the tubs, what might they be called? Well, in one part of the country, they might be called a waggoner. In Yorkshire, they might be called a hurrier. In Lancashire, they might be called a drawer. In Northumberland, they might be called a putter. And up in Scotland, there may be a haulage man. Okay, so you've got different words being used for exactly the same job, but in different geographical areas. And the thing is, the same mining lexis can also be polysemous, meaning that you get one particular word which means different things in different areas. Take the word snap. What does that word mean to you as a noun? Well, in Yorkshire, snap is your bait box. It's the food that a miner takes with him to eat. Whereas when you go to Durham, for a Durham miner, when there were such things, snap is an instrument used on the screens to cut waste off coal. Okay, so what you've got here is synchronic variation. You've got a tremendous variation that's going on in the occupational work areas, and quite often it's dialectical and it's to do with the geographical area that these people are in. Okay, now let's go legal, shall we? So legal language is so special, it's got its own word, legalese. So the very specific discourse of legal language. I'm going to give you some legalese words and do some research. So where do these words come from? What do they mean? What did they originally mean? Voir dire, estoppel, larches, prima facie, novation, waiver, subjudice, can't even say it, habeas corpus, tort, subpoena, government. Fee simple or fee simple. Where do the words come from? What do they mean? What were their original meanings? I've just taken 2 of them from here. Here's a bit of research. So voir dire comes from, well, it's medieval. It comes from Anglo-Norman. Remember, in the medieval times, so we're talking about Middle English, sort of 1066 to 1500, then we have a heck of a lot of Norman French words that are piling into the language. David Crystal reckons something like 10,000 words. 10,000 words come into English during this period. And a lot of them are quite precise, you know, from particular semantic fields, and here from the semantic field of the law. So voir dire means speak the truth. And it's a legal phrase. It means a variety of procedures connected with jury trials. Okay, so it's often referred to as an oath taken by jurors to tell the truth. And although it's Anglo-Norman, originally the words come from Latin, verum dicere. Second example, habeas corpus. You may have the body. quite literally, a legal order that states that a person in prison must appear before and be judged by a court of law before he or she can be forced by law to stay in prison. How old is it? Well, 15th century, when it first appears in English. It comes directly from Latin. Two very good demonstrations there, voir dire and habeas corpus, of the very precise legalese that members of the public may come across. So this cuts to the issue, doesn't it, of jargon, that it often feels impenetrable to the outsider, and therefore you are dependent on the expertise of the legal profession to work out what is actually being said. Not only that, but you have common words which are being used in very particular ways in legalese. Take these words: action, party, execute, seizure, and notice how they're being used in this particular document. They started an action against their neighbour, who in this case is the innocent party. The terms of the agreement must be executed, and a general seizure must surely be the outcome. Action, here meaning a law case, party, meaning groups of people in court, executed, meaning carried out, and seizure, meaning the taking of property. Okay, so they've got particular meanings, these everyday words, in a legal context. Good video here called Understanding Legal Language. So watch this on YouTube. It's well worth a watch. It's only quite short, but it talks about the origins of legal language. Let's talk about legal language then. So the language, law is a profession of words, right? So it's not making things, it's not constructing anything. It is all about words. The words of the law are the law. And therefore, legal language, it does need to be very clear. It needs to be unambiguous. But look at this. The preoccupation with precision has led to the opposite of those things, because the language of law is often characterized by wordiness, by very complicated syntax, by high register, all those things that mitigate against it being clear and unambiguous to the lay person, to the non-specialist. Where does legal language come from? Well, it's developed over time. It's obviously built on tradition, because precedent is an important element in law, that you're building upon previous cases. So you look backwards in law to rulings that went before, and a lot of the lexis comes from different languages. So we have words like aforesaid, thenceforth, hithertofore, which were quite commonplace conversational words in the Old English and Middle English times. Old English meaning 449 to 1066 AD, Middle English meaning 1066 to 1500. So those words that I've just said, they were commonplace conversational words in those days, but now have become archaic in everyday speech, but have retained their position in legalese. So you've got those sorts of words, and then you've got the words that we previously mentioned, that come in from Latin and French. So you've got habeas corpus, which we mentioned, corpus delicti, quasi vis major, and also those words from French like demurrer. Okay, so difficult for non-specialists to interpret what's going on. And when you look at legal collocations, i.e. expected groups of words, the funny thing is that they often derive from combinations of languages. So you've got words like, or phrases like, will and testament, where you've got will, which is a good old-fashioned Old English Anglo-Saxon word, and then you've got testament, which came in during the medieval period, which comes in from Latin. Okay, so you've got combinations of etymologies going on there. As I've said before, you've got common everyday words which have uncommon legal meanings. Presents, for example, meaning legal documents. You've got syntax that is often very full of subordinate clauses. Sometimes you have legal documents that have a complete lack of punctuation as well, which doesn't help things. And very often you get modal auxiliary verbs, like deontic modal auxiliary verbs. So words like will and shall and must. Have there been changes to legalese over the years? Well, there have been some attempts to do so. Here we're going to talk about the Plain English campaign. This was set up in the late 1970s. What they wanted to do was to combat confusing and unnecessary jargon in public life. This isn't just to do with legal language, but generally in public life. And so this is an organisation that advises organisations on how they can use plainer kind of languages. So what happens is your company or your institution, they apply for a crystal mark, and the crystal mark, there it is. This shows that Plain English Campaign has approved their document. It's like a seal of approval, so that then the organisation can go to the general public and say, look, we're not going to be using this impenetrable jargon. You're going to be able to understand the language that we're using. So here's some examples of this in a legal context. So there have been changes in the language of the law. In the late 1990s in the UK, we had the following changes, which occurred in the civil court, but not in the Crown Court. So old word writ, new word claim form, old word affidavit, new form statement of truth, old form in camera, new form in private, old form subpoena, new form witness summons. So there's been some efforts over time to improve the clarity of legal language, but it is limited because those changes have not been effective in the Crown Court. Okay, so in this video we've looked at some of the very distinctive and jargonistic uses of language, both in the mining area and in legalese as well. And hopefully that should help you when you get an essay such as evaluate the idea that in public life, occupation is the most important influence on people's language. Thank you very much.